The first time I kissed Jessie, it felt like stealing a piece of heaven in the middle of a storm. The boutique lights had just gone off for the night, and the soft hum of generators outside filled the silence between us. It wasn't planned, nothing about us ever was. Let me take you back a bit. I'm Kate, a simple girl who fell in love with fabrics and fashion before anything else. My boutique in Victoria Island was my baby, the one thing I built from scratch. When I married Chief Emmanuel, yes, the business tycoon everyone respects, I thought my life was perfect. He gave me a new kind of spotlight, but what I didn't expect was Jessie. Jessie was my husband's only son, tall, sharp, and annoyingly confident. He ran his boutique like it was a kingdom, always boasting about how he could outdo my designs. I didn't like him at first. Every meeting with him turned into a war of who could make the better dress or land the bigger client. But one day, everything changed. It was a quiet afternoon, and Jessie had stopped by my boutique, as usual, to pick up my latest collection. But instead of his usual sarcasm, he asked, "Auntie Kate, how do you make your finishing so smooth? My tailors don't seem to get it." I laughed at first, thinking it was one of his tricks. But when I saw how serious he looked, I realized he wasn't trying to compete, he was trying to learn. And so it started, late nights after the boutiques closed, sketching together, teaching him little tricks I'd learned over the years. Emmanuel was often out of town, trusting me to mentor his son. If only he knew. One night, we were working on a design for a big show, and Jessie brushed a strand of hair from my face. I froze, his hand lingering there for just a second too long. That's when I knew we had crossed a line we couldn't come back from. That night, I couldn't sleep, my heart was beating too fast, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jessie's face, his hand on mine, his eyes saying everything his mouth didn't. I told myself it was just a moment, nothing to worry about, but deep down, I knew the truth. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I threw myself into my work, meeting with tailors and answering client calls. By afternoon, I convinced myself it was all in my head. But just as I was about to leave the boutique, Jessie walked in unannounced. "Why are you here?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He smiled, that same annoying but charming smile he always had. "I thought we were working on the final adjustments for the show. Or have you forgotten?" I wanted to tell him to leave, to give me space to think, but I couldn't. Instead, I nodded and let him follow me into the workroom. We walked in silence for most of the evening, the hum of the sewing machines filling the air. Every now and then, I'd catch him watching me, his eyes softer than usual. It made me nervous, but I pretended not to notice. Then, as I was pinning fabric onto a mannequin, he spoke softly, almost a whisper. "Kate, do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" I didn't know how to respond, his words hit too close to home. For years, I'd been trying to fit into Emmanuel's world, to be the perfect wife, the perfect partner, but with Jessie, I didn't have to pretend. "What are you trying to say?" I asked, my voice shaking. He took a step closer. "I'm saying I can't stop thinking about you." My heart stopped. I wanted to tell him to leave, to act like none of this had ever happened, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there, frozen, as he reached for my hand. "I know this is wrong," he said, his voice barely audible, "but I also know I can't help how I feel." In that moment, all the walls I had built came crashing down. I didn't want to think about Emmanuel or the consequences, I just wanted to feel alive. The days that followed felt like walking on a tightrope. On the outside, everything looked perfect. My boutique was buzzing with clients, Emmanuel's business ventures were booming, and we were the picture of a power couple. But inside, I was a mess. Jessie and I became experts in stealing moments, quiet glances during family dinners, brushing past each other when no one was looking, late-night texts about walks. It was dangerous, thrilling, and completely out of control. One evening, Emmanuel announced he'd be traveling to Abuja for a week. My heart sank and soared at the same time. It was one thing to hide behind his presence, knowing there were limits to how far Jessie and I could go, but with him gone, there were no excuses, no barriers. The first night, I stayed late at the boutique, trying to distract myself. Around 11 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was Jesse. "You're still at the shop?" I stared at the message for a few seconds before replying, "Yes, finishing up some orders." "Jesse, I'm coming over." I didn't reply, hoping he'd change his mind. But 15 minutes later, I heard his car pull up. He walked in with that same confidence he always carried, but this time, there was something else in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. "Jesse, you shouldn't be here," I said, trying to sound firm. He ignored me and walked straight to the work table, picking up one of the sketches I'd been working on. "Is this for Lagos Fashion Week?" "Yes," I said, avoiding his gaze. He studied it for a moment, then set it down and turned to face me. "Kate, why do you keep fighting this?" "Fighting what?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what he meant. He stepped closer, his voice low. "You feel it too, don't you?" I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I looked down, my hands trembling as I tried to rearrange the fabrics on the table. He reached out and gently touched my arm. "Kate, look at me." When I did, the words seemed to stop. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, not as Emmanuel's wife or the owner of a successful boutique, but as a woman. "Jesse, this is madness," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Maybe," he said, his lips curving into a sad smile, "but isn't it worth it?" The next morning, I woke up to reality. Emmanuel's voice boomed from the living room earlier than expected. He was supposed to be in Abuja. Why was he back? As I rushed to dress and head downstairs, my heart raced. Had he found out? When I got there, Emmanuel was sitting with Jesse, laughing about something. The tension in the room was unbearable. Jesse glanced at me, his expression unreadable, while Emmanuel patted the seat beside him. "Kate, come sit," Emmanuel said, smiling. I plastered on my best smile and sat down, trying to keep my hands steady. "What's the occasion?" I asked, pretending not to notice Jesse's piercing gaze, but I had to cut my chip shot. Emmanuel said, "Big plans for the family, and I need both of you on board." I felt my stomach churn. Whatever Emmanuel had planned, it was going to test the fragile balance Jesse and I were barely holding on to. The days after Emmanuel's announcement were a blur. He wanted to merge our boutiques, combine my boutique's finesse and creativity with Jesse's bold, modern approach. It sounded like a great business move on paper, but for Jesse and me, it was a disaster waiting to happen. We were forced to spend even more time together under Emmanuel's watchful eye. Every shared glance, every accidental touch felt like a ticking bomb. And then came the dinner party. Emmanuel invited some of his business associates and clients to the house to announce the partnership. I spent the evening playing the role of the supportive wife, smiling and nodding at all the right moments, but I couldn't help noticing how Jesse avoided me. By the end of the night, I found him outside, leaning against his car. The warm glow of the garden lights reflected off his face, but his usual confidence was gone. "Why are you out here?" I asked, walking up to him. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked up at the sky and let out a long breath. "I can't do this anymore, Kate." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" "This, whatever we're doing, it's not fair to Emmanuel. It's not fair to you." For a moment, I felt anger rise in my chest. "You think it's easy for me? Do you think I planned for this to happen?" "I know you didn't," he said, his voice calm, "but we both know where this is heading, and it's not a place we can go." I wanted to argue, to tell him that what we had was real, but deep down, I knew he was right. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He reached out and gently touched my hand, his fingers lingering for just a moment. "We go back to who we were before this. You're my stepmother, and I'm your husband's son. That's the only way this ends without ruining everything." That night, as I lay in bed beside Emmanuel, I thought about all the choices I'd made. I thought about Jesse, about the connection we had, and about the life I had built with Emmanuel. And I realized something. We women often carry so much on our shoulders, expectations, sacrifices, secrets, but at what cost? To every woman reading this, let me say this: love yourself enough to make choices that align with your peace. It's easy to get swept up in the emotions, the excitement, but remember, every action has a consequence. Don't let fleeting moments of passion define your life.